What does the King of Pop and Metal Clay have in common? Stay tuned and find out. I'll give you a hint. It's a hyperbaric chamber. Hee hee. Okay, so back in the 80s, Michael Jackson was allegedly sleeping in a hyperbaric chamber. He thought the hyperbaric chamber was going to maintain his youth, and he wanted to have his skin supple and stop it from cracking. And he wanted to live to be 150 years old. But unfortunately, we know what happened. And 9 years after his death, they found the hyperbaric chamber in the back of a warehouse in Los Angeles, and that's where it sits today. But you might ask, Patrick, what does this have to do with metal clay? And let me tell you, we are going to create a hyperbaric chamber of our own, except we're going to call it a hydration chamber because that's more appropriate. And it's going to prevent our clay from cracking, just like Michael's skin. Okay, here's what we're going to need. We are going to need a container of some sort that has a lid, and we'll also be needing wire. This is just, a copper wire that's coated. It could be any stiff wire. You're going to need a sponge and a pair of pliers. We'll also need scissors and also an X-Acto knife. Okay, so this is a container made by Glad, and what's nice about it is it has this lid that has a recessed area in it, and that's where the clay is going to sit. You can really use any container that has a closure with it. You could even, use a cup that's upside down or something like that if if you don't want to make anything like this. So we'll start out by putting a couple holes in the top. I just use my X-Acto to bore out a couple of holes. You could probably use a drill and a drill bit as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this wire and put it through. And when I made the holes, I was paying attention. I intentionally made them a little bit smaller than what I thought I needed because I want to make sure there's a nice tight seal around that, because you have the plastic cup and then you have the coated wire, and those two things create a seal. So make that hole as small as you can without damaging the cup, and you can make sure you can still fit the wire through it. Next, we're going to take the rubber stamp and press it deep into the clay to make sure we get a nice strong impression. And then we're going to head over to our computer and hit the like and subscribe button. That's right. Okay, so the next part is to measure the sponge and cut out the sponge. So I'm just going to take a template and just sort of figure out what size I need for the sponge. I'm going to take that information and I will end up cutting out the sponge, but first I need to transfer that onto the sponge, and I'm going to use a Sharpie to make a mark on the sponge. It ended up being 1.25 inches for this particular size and shape of container. And of course you'll want to draw on the side of the sponge. If you have a two-sided sponge and you have a scrubby and a regular sponge side, you want to make sure you make the marking on the sponge side, and that way you can actually see the marking. Now, from this point on, you can see here that I just made the general shape of of the circle while I was cutting it. It doesn't need to be a perfect circle. It just needs to fit on the inside. It's actually kind of difficult to cut a perfect circle in a sponge form anyhow. So, but this will just make sure that the sponge isn't too big. I just start off by nibbling off little pieces of it, and that'll create like a octagon shape, and then that octagon shape I'll nibble down a little bit further and a little bit further. But like I said, you really don't need it to be perfect, and as you can see here, mine is certainly not perfect at all. So next I just want to make sure I mark the sponge because I need to poke a couple of holes in there. I just found this Sharpie marker does a really good job because the nib of this one is kind of narrow and fits right in the hole. This doesn't need to be perfect. This is just for poking a couple of, marking a couple of holes, and that way we'll be able to feed the wire through it. So I fed the wire through one way just to get those holes started, and then I'm going to take the wire out and reverse it so that it looks like this. I want to make sure that the open ends are near the scrubby part of the sponge. Now, initially when I put this through, it wasn't really fitting properly, so if it's happening to you, something you might want to consider is cutting off the ends so that they're nice and even. And when I did this, it seemed to make the process go a lot faster. It just went right through. So you're going to just gently push the wires through the holes to get one first, get that one going, and then get the other one. You're going to push the whole entire thing all the way up using your thumbs to secure it, and then pull that wire and give it a twist, and that twist is going to actually secure that sponge nice and tight up to the top of the inside of that container. Now at this point you can bend the wires. It's not really necessary, but just a decorative thing to do. I've seen people put beads on top of this and it's just kind of fun. You can even use different colored wires. If you have different color clay or different types and brands of clay, you can use different colors of wire. Also make sure that you wet that sponge nice and good. The sponge will of course soak up the water and it'll keep the air inside of that container nice and humidified. You want to make sure also that you shake out any excess water because you don't want the clay to be sitting in a pool of water. Now this container here does have that recessed area, which is nice, and that's where the clay is going to sit, and usually the water will collect around the outside of that area. And there you go. That's the humidity chamber.
Hee hee.
This will work with just about any metal clay, and typically the metal clays have the same sort of packaging where there'll be multiple packages inside of one another, and they're going to vary depending on the brand. But one of the other things that this humidity chamber can do is make the process of taking the clay in and out of the package so much easier. So typically you would take the clay out, work with it, put it back in the package, put that package back within the other package, and then put that package within the other package. And then when you needed some more clay, you would have to reverse the whole process and open that package back up. And the same is true with pretty much all of the clays. But with the humidity chamber, it really simplifies that process. Not only does it keep your clay moist, but also you don't have to worry about the opening and closing of packages and clay and packages and all that. It's just a simple process of lifting up the humidity chamber, taking out the clay that you need, and then putting out the clay that you don't need, putting that back. Super simple process and makes everything much, much easier. Next, we're going to take the rubber stamp and press it deep into the clay to make sure we get a nice strong impression. And then we're going to head over to our computer and hit the like and subscribe button. That's right.